She saw me as a threat. She saw me calling her out on Twitter, and she felt threatened, and she wanted me to stop.
But at the end of the day, if you have a social media following, and your social media following is growing, you have to have self-control.
Now, it must be said that with regards to the overarching Onision situation, I don't want to make any statements of fact regarding the legitimacy of the allegations made against him. I also don't want to discredit any of the women who have come forward with these allegations, and I don't want to make any verdict of whether I find the accusations true or false. That is not my prerogative, and I can only make a comment on the things I can personally see as well as deduce from the facts. For example, I can see that Onision is an egotistical douchebag, as there is clear proof of that, ranging from what he would say in his videos through to his feud with his local government and his overall presence online. It's enough for me to conclude that he's a total scumbag. As much as this is the case, it doesn't give us free rein to be scumbags ourselves, and it's important that although you may want to see some conclusion to this saga, you can't go around forcing people to follow the exact same mentality as you, and you can't attack them if they bring up valid points that don't support your ideas. Not only does this make your side of the argument look reckless, it also makes the argument itself seem rather weak and dependent on people falling in line, meaning criticism is not allowed, and that's not how we work. The only time I've dipped my toes into the tale of Onision was when we took a look at Madam, the girl who capitalized on the dislike for Onision and his rampant abuse of YouTube's copyright system. By playing into the narrative that any justice against Gregory is good justice, she managed to raise over $7,000 to take him to court, however, not actually taking him to court and scamming everyone who donated to her. That was one of the many subplots in the Onision saga, and was probably as far as I was willing to go with the amount of time I invested in the overall situation. But alas, here we are, and now we are literally running headfirst into the main grit of the story. Great. I must warn you that I will be saying things that you will not agree with, and I will hold out the presumption of neutrality with regards to whatever happens beyond the internet. So I'm going to try and keep potentially defamatory statements to a minimum. So today we're going to explore a situation from over a month ago that I observed in real time and saw unfold both publicly and privately. And I believe it's in the interest of you guys that I explain my perspective on what happened and also explain how it started and where it's ended up. This is one of those instances where the vocal minority causes such a fuss that it makes the majority look rather undesirable and puts the group in bad stead. All of this could have been avoided if people weren't afraid to hold someone they follow accountable for their actions and didn't try to excuse these actions for something completely unrelated. If you haven't already, it's time for you to grab your beverage, take your seat, and get comfortable. Join me as we explore the destructive outburst from Onision's most vocal accuser, Shiloh, and discuss how her actions led to unnecessary conflict and alienation of those most valuable in spreading their story, and how this has put the overall Onision conflict into a very uncertain place. To begin, let me explain what happened. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. This whole situation is a complete mess. It started with one conflict and then devolved into many more sub-conflicts, which blew the original issue wide open and started to make many people very, very angry. Another big problem is that it had nothing to do with anything Onision had done, and he has definitely taken it upon himself to capitalize on the destruction of the anti-Onision community's credibility. As you would expect, there were quite a lot of people involved, and it all went down on Twitter.com. If you haven't seen it already, Toad McKinley made a 50-minute video documenting the entire situation that occurred, so it's quite clear that this was a very big incident. For the sake of this commentary, I'm going to try and make it as concise as possible, but clear enough for you to understand the gravity of what happened, and then we'll get into the technical shit. So let me introduce the players. So this all started on the 19th of February in the replies of a tweet by Sarah. If you don't know who she is, well, she's basically Onision's latest accuser. She joined the movement when Chris Hansen began his so-called investigation into Onision. However, she went solo to seek her own justice after finding out that her laptop, which allegedly had evidence of illegal activity, was never sent to the FBI as promised by Hansen and his former producer, Vincent Nicotra. That is a whole other story in itself. I did say it was messy. What's worse is that it took another person, specifically Stephen Asarch of Newsweek, to get his laptop back to Sarah months after she had sent it to Hansen. This is important because the tweet by Sarah claimed she had taken this laptop to a local FBI office and submitted it as evidence, which is what was supposed to have happened months before. In this tweet, she advertised her Venmo so she could raise funds to buy herself a new laptop for school. This is where the conflict begins. Introduce Player 1, the human double-stuffed Oreo, Nicholas DiOrio, the main protagonist or antagonist, depending on what flavor of Doritos you like. He replied to Sarah's tweet with this seemingly innocent question. I have no issue with this question whatsoever, and I don't see how anyone could. It's well within reason of speculation and is essentially asking for transparency because she's just dropped a link asking for people to donate to her. Nick gives his reasoning for why he asked the question and his response to this situation, and that will be linked in the description to give you an idea of what his thought process was. Essentially, he was skeptical because there was some inconsistency with the story, and if you know DiOrio, he will poke something until he finds answers, and he took that to Sarah's DMs where he got said answers. The conclusion from this is that she wasn't being transparent with what she was raising money for, and as someone with a relatively large following, it's rather inappropriate for her to do so. Sarah released a tweet apologizing for her lack of transparency and also added a disclaimer to her original tweet a day later. Nick quote tweeted her apology along the lines of him being grateful for her doing so, and this is the end of the story. Until a very interesting crossover. The not suitable for monetization star Indigo White responded to Nick saying that it wasn't a big deal and that who cares, she didn't force people to donate to her. In my opinion, this is one of the weakest arguments to make. People are at liberty to spend their money on whatever they want, but that doesn't mean the person asking or selling a product is exempt from any criticism for not being transparent with what people are actually buying. This is essentially what Nick tried to argue, stating that he was skeptical of what Sarah was saying and justified his reasoning in the argument with Indigo. That's all he did, and that's the end of that. Enter Shiloh. A lot has been said about Shiloh and her demeanour. One main point is that she claims to be patient zero, when she isn't the first of Onision's alleged victims, and as she maintains this identity, she has used it as a way to justify her methods in protecting the other women that have accused Onision of misconduct. It is in this mindset of hers that she believed she was justified in targeting Nick in a series of tweets in which she claims to be protecting Sarah, heavily underlying the idea that Sarah is defenseless and needs protection. Of course, Sarah is young, she is 19, but she also has her own platform to defend herself and is her own independent woman. She is no little girl. So what comes next is a severe and continuous lapse in judgment by Shiloh in which she exposes her reliance on emotion rather than on the facts, and especially the truth, which has consequentially tainted her reputation and credibility amongst a great number of large voices. The tweet that initiated this collapse was a direct order for all of her 30,000 plus followers to report Nick based on the grounds of releasing private DMs and also encouraging the doxing of a 19-year-old girl. From the get-go, this is a violation of Twitter's terms of service. You cannot tell people to go and report others for things that are untrue and do not violate the services. This is a method a lot of stan groups do to try and remove dissenters, and it is against the rules. There are 4 major points of contention to this single tweet, and they all have a very detrimental impact on Shiloh's image and credibility as a source of information. The first point was, of course, the violation of Twitter's terms by Shiloh when making this tweet, and further, her first reason for doing so is completely irrelevant to Twitter's terms terms. In fact, Nick is well within his rights to release the DMs without consent from Sarah. Michigan's law for the recording of private conversations requires only one consenting party for recording, and as Nick is a party, he can consent to this recording and is therefore able to publish this conversation. Whether it is ethical to do so is a whole other question, but in this case, it is arguably justified to use these DMs as they provided information in the interest of transparency, which later resulted in Sarah updating a tweet to provide more transparency. Shiloh's second reason in the tweet was yet again another miss, and it was a very big miss at that. According to Shiloh, Nick encouraged the doxing of Sarah, something quite deplorable and highly dangerous to do with the context of who she is. The only issue here is that it just isn't true. The encouragement that Shiloh was referring to is a tweet by Nick saying, "Good find," to a user named Angela. Now, Angela made a very stupid tweet in a thread concerning whether or not Sarah's claim of buying a laptop for the school was true. Sarah responded to this tweet expressing her concern and quite frankly, wasn't very happy about it, which is entirely reasonable. Angela further agitated Sarah by stating that she knew this would make her respond, a very stupid and mindless thing to do. She deserves criticism for this. However, what she received from Shiloh was much more than this, and that will be discussed soon. Essentially, Nick was accused by Shiloh of encouraging Angela's supposed doxing of Sarah because he replied to her. Sarah wasn't doxed, so there was no way Nick could say good find to something that doesn't exist. This comment was actually in response to a clip Angela shared of Sarah on a livestream with Billy the Fridge, saying she doesn't want to take anyone's money. This of course was in relation to their question on why Sarah was asking for money now, and Nick was simply expressing that the timestamp was a good find. That is all he did. The final major complication of this tweet was in the way Shiloh had added the hashtag #deplatformpredators, the hashtag that is associated with removing predators from the online platforms. Now, this is arguably the worst part of what she did in this tweet because this takes it from being a basic call-out tweet to being a very defamatory statement that Nick could have taken to court if people weren't wise to what Shiloh did. Her statement is not based on the truth, and we can easily prove that through the readily available evidence that shows that she is putting out libel. The imputation that Nick is a predator is also one that is untrue, and her successive tweets do not help her in this case. Take the statement, "You're gross, and you can't hide." As well as in her admission to being wrong about the doxing, she claims Nick was trying to harass a 19-year-old girl. Together this creates an idea that Nick is preying on Sarah when it's not the case. He literally asked a question. The big problem here is that she has not only lied about what Nick had done, but also tried to categorize him within the same mold as the people they have accused of being predators, as well as trying to get his Twitter removed in the process. So for simply asking why Sarah needed money, Nick was not only targeted by Shiloh, who has over 30,000 followers, but also had his name and image smeared by her in front of this same audience. It's ridiculous, and this is only the beginning. Now Angela, the woman who goes by Pink Pineapple on Twitter, instigated a response by Sarah with what can only be described as a threat to find out what school she was going to. I don't think it requires an analytical mind to understand that this is not the best of things to say to someone, nor is it a moral thing to bait them into responding by using these kinds of scare tactics. She was wrong, was rightfully criticised for it, and I'm pretty sure she expressed remorse for what she did and acknowledged it was the wrong thing to say. However, the reaction by Shiloh is far beyond what would be deemed justified, and it exposed a very toxic and irrational behaviour that could have put people's lives in danger. Before she targeted Nick, Shiloh tweeted out a call to report Angela's account with no reason except for a prior tweet quoting what Angela had said with the caption, "You're really fucking creepy and you need to stop before I come by for a visit." Now, other than calling for people to report her account, this is arguably a proportionate response to what Angela had said. You try and find where she lives, I'll come and find you. An eye for an eye. If she had left it at this, we wouldn't be in this situation and you probably wouldn't have to sit here trying to wrap your head around all of this. She took it further to her alternate Twitter profile after Angela had blocked Shiloh's main account. What Shiloh had said to Angela was recorded in an email alert of a DM, and as a context, in a Twitter report of the reported DMs. Well, I don't think much needs to be said here. But here's the wrap. Shiloh has shown her hostility towards those that somewhat cross one of her sisters, and although Angela was in the wrong for at least 2 of her tweets, it doesn't justify the actual threat of doxing her because of it. Not only that, telling someone that they should essentially die is beyond acceptable from someone who's a legitimate public figure in the eyes of many people. and I don't think she understood the gravity of what was going to follow her blind outrage. Telling Angela that the world would be better without her and that she should eliminate herself is not a good look for Shiloh, and considering she threatened to find where Angela lived, it wasn't surprising when Angela was doxxed. I don't know who did the dox, but according to Angela, not only was her estranged mother called, but her maiden name, town, and pictures of her child were spread. It's very hard to see how an ignorant tweet deserves the response of not only being told you're worthless, but also having your private information published by some random nutjobs on the internet. There's no real balance to this reaction. Shiloh took to Twitter to justify what she did and also had the audacity to be very condescending and above criticism because apparently nearly everyone can't seem to have things into perspective. First of all, Angela's tweet wasn't actually a threat to dox Sarah, but more or less a request to others if they know what city she lives in so they can find an answer to what they were talking about in the thread she replied to. The hidden context to this tweet was a discussion about when school semesters begin so they could check whether Sarah was being truthful. With this context, her statement, "I'm sure we can figure it out," seems more or less like a reference to what they were talking about, not a call to dox Sarah. This is where the poor wording and thought process of the tweet comes into effect, because out of context it looks like a threat to find Sarah's private information. So in a heated moment it can be easily misconstrued as a threat and justified Sarah's reaction, but not Shiloh's, and she came in like a raging bull. She further exaggerated the situation by making an appeal to emotion, trying to pin Sarah as this defenseless little girl being exposed to millions, although the collective audience of that tweet was essentially Sarah's, Nick's, Josh Pescator's and also Angela's. Combined, they have fewer followers than that of Sarah herself, so this argument of millions is drastically overinflated to sell Shiloh's idea that she was acting in a justified manner. Shiloh then went on to list some reminder points, such as Sarah lives alone, has an online predator stalking her, lives in another state, and the police don't respond to doxing. What would you do? Be honest. Let me put this into perspective. No one tried to dox or encouraged any doxing of Sarah. In fact, no one had any of her private information to release. The worst that could be observed from the tweets is the threat to find her city. So already Shiloh's premise is heavily skewed. There's a difference between calling someone out for saying something very stupid and targeting someone saying that they should essentially die and then showing no remorse when their private information is released and pictures of their child are shared around. That's something to think about. Whether Sarah lives alone or with someone else is irrelevant, as is her difference in her state. It's just a load of nonsense that doesn't put anything into perspective. If someone had went up to her home and posted photos of it or whatnot, then I can agree this response is justified. But this isn't the situation. She overreacted and would not back down. This seems to be a common theme with Shiloh, as she also refused to back down against Nick when she released a tweet acknowledging her ignorance over the good find comment, yet proceeded to accuse him of harassing Sarah because he asked questions. She labelled him a predator for questioning the transparency of someone with a notable public presence. I don't need to explain why that's a bad look for Shiloh. And it only got worse. She received a mountain of backlash for this tweet. Not only were a lot of her supporters voicing their disapproval, but a lot of relatively large figures came to the defense of Nick, even people who dislike him, and the public perception of Shiloh was undeniably ruined because she had made the decision to lie. One of the main issues in situations where there's an alleged crime that involves an incident that is based solely on testimony is getting people to believe your story, but also getting people to tell your story. Many people over the years have given the victims of Onision's abusive behaviour a platform to share their story and also further scrutinise the abhorrent behaviour of Onision. Two particular people have used their platform and their time to help further the efforts to keep the message about Onision going, as well to maintain the validity of the stories that have come out against him. Repzion and Edwin Costa are two names that have advocated for the women that have shared their experiences with Onision, and are also trying to help prevent any future possibilities of this happening again. In essence, they are vital in maintaining the circulation of the story, and that's an important factor in spreading the message. So a part of that is maintaining the credibility of the story, and it's also within their interest to ensure nothing affects their attempts to simply help those who need it. Which is why they made it clear to Shiloh that her actions were incredibly inappropriate and did not reflect well on her movement, as well as maintaining the integrity of what they have invested years of their lives into. To put this into perspective, Repzion has spent the last 8 years covering the Onision story, and has also had his own personal issues with The Onion, his latest being the pointless court hearing. This is why he is a reputable figure to speak out against Onision, and also has a big platform that consistently brings widespread attention to the shit Greg does, so he is arguably one of the main players in the Onision saga. He knows the ins and outs and knows what's justified and what is not. He made it clear in a Twitter video that Shiloh was out of line for what she did, and he knows that this is something that will be used against her, as well as everyone involved in trying to seek some sort of justice.
I know that you're angry, I know that you're hurt, I know that you're emotional, but don't do this tweet because one is going to come back and haunt you. It's going to be used against you in the future. And they were right. Absolutely it would be. Because I, as somebody who has a growing social media following, I have to be responsible for what I say publicly. If I go off and tell a fan or somebody to kill themselves, regardless of how bad they are to me, I'm still responsible for what I say. I'm responsible for how I react and my response to those people. It is completely, entirely on me, on my response. It's hard. I get it. I understand it. But at the end of the day, if you have a social media following and your social media following is growing, you have to have self-control.
However, he said that her response to his criticism was him being berated in the DMs for throwing her under the bus. Need I say that she was the one throwing everyone under the bus for her actions? When it comes to Edwin, things were very different, and there was a lot more conflict. But yet again, Shiloh exhibited the same irrational behaviour she had shown with Nick and Angela. I haven't even mentioned the part where she was lying about threatening and doxing a guy called Bonking, but I don't think we need any more examples to highlight the inherent issue with her behaviour. Edwin had commented on the revelation of her attacking Angela in the DMs, which resulted in Shiloh accusing him of being a part of the Horde in his DMs. In essence, she is basically rationalising that everyone's criticism is just the Horde out to get her and that she's a victim of people misrepresenting her, even though she is guilty of that herself. The fact she's used her status as an alleged victim to negate any criticism towards her by Edwin is extremely disrespectful and also damaging to her own case. You can't use your victimhood as a defense for something that isn't related to anything you're an alleged victim of. In reality, Edwin is doing more for any potential case by calling her out on her wrongdoings, because it will inevitably cause damage to the reputation and credibility of every claim going forward. This is something that baffles me. There are people that are genuinely trying to respect the allegations and get them tabled in front of a judge, yet they also know that there's a lot of evidence that is based on testimony. The credibility of the story can be picked apart by public outbursts like Shiloh's, and the more people brigade and barrack people who seek the truth or hold people accountable, the more it affects the overall image of any allegation. Her attack against Edwin was just so unnecessary that completely threw everyone. This came before he made his first video, and then what came after that was just more of the same self-destructive public outbursts that don't help anyone whatsoever. This was a more emotional conflict than what had happened with Diorio, and the difference in how they made their response videos to the situation could be attributed to their overall investment into the overarching Onision situation. Edwin has covered a lot of Onision's shithousery, whereas Nick has had a few spats on Twitter with people making outrageous statements, mostly emanating from the anti-O community. In essence, Nick's response was witty, yet it had a more factual tone to it, whereas Edwin's response to the situation was more emotional, because he is genuinely invested in the story. He took nearly 40 minutes to explain his side, and along the way he highlighted where Shiloh had publicly misrepresented him, and also tried to shut him up in the DMs. At the end of the day, she went ahead and berated and misrepresented someone she had never interacted with before he had called her out. She accused him of covering the Onision situation solely for revenue and clout, rather than the actual care of the women who have come forward. She spoke on behalf of the women she supposedly represents and essentially exploited their status and trust to defend herself from criticism. This is why accountability is so important. The conflict with Edwin was the conclusion to the week of insanity, and it left a bad taste in the mouth of many people both in the community and beyond. It highlighted a major problem that I don't believe has to do solely with Shiloh, but the culture of the community that pines for justice in any shape or form, and the removal of people from their online platforms based on the notion they're a danger to younger girls. However, this doesn't excuse Shallow's participation and direction of her public outbursts, as she is a public figure with a weighty following, and with that is the responsibility of how she acts with her platform. This wasn't a coordinated effort to take down Shallow, nor was it an effort to grief her or Sarah, but the reaction to it did show everyone what happens when you enable such ignorant and destructive behaviour. Those who egg Shallow on are severely unaware of how the world works, and the fact that the perceived image of a community is usually based on the people with the biggest status and how they act.
So in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best thing to go ahead and keep the shit show going. Just keep that in mind for next time, eh? But with that being said, the damage to the reputation has been done. Whether or not it is irreversible is yet to be seen, but there has definitely been a shift in the perceived credibility of Shiloh and the extended community she represented. From a technical point of view, in any potential case, there will more than likely be an attempt to use this situation as an evidence to present to court. That's even if we get that far. However, everyone's favourite washed up meme is adamant that this will end up in a conviction, so who really knows? But the worst part is that there was a winner to this, and as much as everyone involved had expressed their remorse that it came to this point, Onision was handed a very rare win, simply because his opponents took a very bad loss.
Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies.
So this all started because of a question. Could you please be transparent? A very normal question, a question we ask people with a position of influence over others. It's a fair question to ask someone. The only difference is that the person who was asked this question not only holds an influential platform, but is also an alleged victim of a criminal act. This is where the issues start to creep in. There's a severely lopsided imbalance in the way people within this group react to people asking derivative questions, and don't follow the angle that is the most popular to look through. The irony of this situation is that Sarah obviously took note of the criticism and understood why it was probably best to be more transparent, because she let people know where else the donated money was going. Nobody pressured her to do anything, no one was victimizing her, but especially, no one was harassing her. However, this isn't observed by the vocal locals, because all they see is an attack against a victim of someone they truly despise, someone who has been flaunting his freedom for the past 10 years and essentially taunts them with every public display he makes. He is their enemy. There is no middle ground. You are either anti-Onision or a pedoprotector. So if you come into this from a third-party perspective, you are vilified if you attempt to take a neutral, more logical opinion on the matter. I'm sure you'll enjoy some of the comments that may appear down in that comment section below. There's a them and us mentality that's concocted a toxic culture within the anti-Onision movement. It's even in the name, and it's arguably the main reason as to why this whole situation with Shiloh got to the point that it did. Sure, she is responsible for her own actions and how she uses her prominent social media presence. But just because she's a victim doesn't mean you can't tell her that she should be a bit more responsible. The anti-Os have created such a backwards idea of who's exempt from criticism that there are so many instances where they allow things that aren't acceptable to go unanswered. They're scared of holding anyone but Onision accountable, and that is just a recipe for disaster. Chris Hansen is a wonderful example of this. If you even question his credentials, you will meet resistance. If you call out as bullshit, you will meet resistance. There's a clear defense of Hansen simply because he used to host a show that entrapped predators. But all he can do now is respond to semi-popular internet comedians with a picture of his Emmy for something completely unrelated to his journalistic ability. Their desire to pin Onision with anything they possibly can, and their aggression towards those who speak from another perspective is ultimately what will lead to their downfall. As I said earlier, this is a vocal minority that pushes these values, but Shallow's involvement has broadcast to everyone the corrupted values that the group has as a whole. From the point of view that I have, image is the most crucial aspect of the movement, and the credibility and integrity of those within are what helps promote their ideas. Without that, it is nothing but a group of angry and unhinged Twitter users hell-bent on trying to deplatform and convict a person they don't like. It's really confusing how no one has disavowed the toxicity and insurgency of these people and the damage they're causing to a 10-year story. It's also most likely the reason that after this complete calamity, Onision has emerged from the depths and started to challenge the likes of Chris Hansen and starting to partake in interviews where he is challenged by people. The balances have shifted, and as much as it is sad to say, Onision is taking advantage of this and is going to milk it until the tides turn. That's if they ever do again.
It's more likely he will inevitably do something stupid to shift the balance against him, but only time will tell. However, what can be said for now is that he is winning the mind games.
Beyond this, Shiloh has seemingly distanced herself from her online campaign against Onision. She deleted a bunch of tweets, unfollowed everyone, and hasn't used the account since the end of March. She has been active on her personal account, so I can only speculate as to where she is at with regards to the overall anti-Onision movement. She was very close to the Hansen investigation, so maybe he's told her to take a sideline for a while until the fall eventually levels out, because at this point in time, Hansen himself is taking hits from all sides. The credibility of the whole operation is really up in the air at this point, and nothing really suggests that it will get better anytime soon. I personally don't think Shiloh is entirely to blame for this, and the people who sat behind their screens, fueled her ego and let her dig herself further and further down into a hole are ultimately at fault as well. They are the ones who actively call out Onision, call him different derivatives of his name, but have also given the Onion this win, and I don't think they like being told that whatsoever. It's turning out to be a year of harsh realities, and at this point, I don't see Onision being convicted of any crime anytime soon. Thanks to Hansen's amazing investigative armchair journalism, the laptop more than likely wouldn't be accepted as evidence by a judge due to the fact that it has changed custody so many times and was apparently tampered with by Vincent Nicotra. The only real evidence that could be used is witness testimony, and in a criminal trial, unsubstantiated testimonies rarely meet the expectations to be able to find someone guilty beyond the reasonable doubt. In layperson's terms, this means a jury present at the trial must find that the evidence given by the prosecution and complainant must essentially prove that the crime in fact happened and that there is no reasonable alternative explanation. That is the way the criminal justice system works, and no matter how much you dislike an individual, you can't bend the law to your will, which is why Chris Hansen's insistence that Onision will be jailed is rather intriguing.
It's insane what he's been saying. It's hard to watch. I honestly try not to. In the meantime, I'll remind you of something I said a while back. I was a reporter before he was born. I'll be a reporter after he goes to prison. Hopefully, where he won't have a lot of access to making those videos on the internet.
Only time will tell if any admissible forensic evidence is found, but for now, let's not try and prejudice any potential criminal proceedings just for a month. Now, with that in mind, this is not me saying give up in your pursuit of justice. I'm just saying don't put all your money on a lengthy sentence because it more than likely won't happen. There's still legal routes that can be taken, and a civil lawsuit holds a lesser burden of proof than what is required for a criminal conviction. I believe Sarah, with the financial backing of those who support her, can take Onision to court and bring something home that resembles justice. Likewise, people who have been affected by Onision's abuse of the copyright system on YouTube should band together and take him to court, set a precedent for YouTube to intervene in situations where their copyright systems are being abused, and not only help a majority of the YouTube community, but also smack Onision's scumbaggery across his cheeks. There are so many avenues to take. There is obviously a lot of risk, but at the end of the day, we create our own stories, and from this we can strive to make an impact on the world and enact change. Why be negative and be against something when you can be positive and progressive? Become a victim vindicator rather than devolve into a battle between two sides. Do something positive and #vindicate victims. End the unnecessary toxicity, and you might find that things will make you feel a whole lot better.
The events that transpired were very unfortunate, and I don't think anybody would do it again if they were presented a chance. But the damage has been done, and the only way is forward. I feel like the person most affected by this is Sarah, simply because of her story and the fact that she's been thrust into the spotlight as the poster child for this movement. So in all honesty, I hope she is vindicated and gets what she wants. As for me, unless something truly spectacular happens, these will be my final thoughts on the saga. On that note, it's time for us to part ways. I'll see you and a massive forehead very soon. Until then, goodbye.
This is the end.